Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. I'm really sorry that these videos have tailed off. My last video I did say that I was going to be producing a lot more videos and doing wrap-ups and things like that, and I asked for your advice on what videos you would like me to do. And then kind of after Christmas into the new year I decided to make the decision to move back to a parent's home. I made that decision because me and my partner want to save up for a house. So you can't really tell in the position I'm in, but I'm in a completely new bedroom in a completely new house. So most of January/February was taken up with packing everything, moving everything, and settling in. So I've now been at the new property about 3 weeks. So that's kind of really had an impact on me being able to film videos. The house that I'm living in now has 4 other people living in it, and that really impacts when I can get time to film. I don't have much alone time anymore, and we also have other family members that visit quite regularly, so this was a window, so I thought I would take it. So I am in the Booktube prize for 2024. I have been assigned the non-fiction for the Octafinals that I am judging, Group D. So the books that I have on Group D, I have Rough Sleepers by Tracy Kidder. I also have Story of Art by Katie Hessel. I have A Stranger in Your Own City by Gathar Abdul Adda, The Great Displacement by Jake Bittle, The Wager by David Gran, and Master Slave Husband Wife by Ilion Wu. So at the moment we are in March, we are in the 2nd of March, and I've only read 1 book. So I really need to catch up on reading because I now have 5 books to read in 1 month, which I think is doable. I think I've just been prioritising non-Booktube reading, and that's why that's happened. So the 1 book that I have finished was The Story of Art Without Men by Katie Hessel. So I think in the end I gave this 4 stars. I don't usually like the history of art. I'm not particularly interested in it, but I do have an interest in kind of a feminist non-fiction and telling the narrative of women, particularly women that have not been acknowledged previously in history, that have kind of been whitewashed or eradicated. This book looked at artwork, different forms of artwork, different ways that art is created, different techniques, different styles of art, and looked at women through separate time periods. So it looked at 1500 to 1900, 1870 to 1950, 1945 to 1970, 1970 to 2000, and then 2000 to present day. And it broke it up into some were women of colour, some were white women. It talked about the kind of social standing of women in the context of when the art was produced. It talked about different types of artwork, some that had a predilection for women to be involved in purely because they weren't allowed into other art forms. For example, life form art, I can't remember what it's called, but obviously when you do paintings of people in the nude or things like that, that was something that women weren't allowed to do for many centuries. So things like textiles and producing art using textiles was something that was more prevalent with women because they were able to access that. And it showed different artwork from Europe and also globally, and how they made political statements, how they told stories about women's narrative in the home, about women's identity, women's sexuality. Briefly touched on kind of trans women as well and their story towards the end. It talked about the impact of things like COVID towards the end and how that helped or changed how people spoke about art and projected art. it kind of looked at other big things like 9/11 and the war, the impact of the First World War and the Second World War on women's ability to produce artwork. It showed things like photography, collage art, painting, still lifes, drawing of objects. There was a whole plethora of things in here, and I actually found it quite interesting because I think one thing she did really well for non-fiction is she weaved in all the important points that a layperson who doesn't have a particular interest in art needs to know without flooding the book with information and tidbits and things that are more art history that are going to lose a reader who doesn't have an interest in art history. So it kind of told this story of pioneering women, which I was really interested in, and she kept the chapters short enough that I wasn't losing interest. Because I think some non-fictions previously that have been assigned to me through this prize have had the unfortunate edge of they were written purposefully for somebody who was a professional in that sector or in that area. So I think she did a really good job of that. I think the stories were interesting. I didn't know anything about them. They were new and refreshing to me. I think the arc of the book, what she meant to achieve was to give recognition to these people, tell their story, give a bit of context, explain how important their work was, and that was definitely achieved. So I was pleasantly surprised that I found this interesting. It also contains a lot of images of the artworks, which I thought was a beautiful addition because, again, it's not really text heavy, and you can kind of see in the next slide or the next page, because I read it as an ebook, so it kind of felt like sliding across the page, exactly what she just described in a small little paragraph about the impact of that artwork. You could then take a look at the artwork and compare what she said. So yeah, 4 stars, really enjoyed it. I'm planning to read Rough Sleepers next, and I'm also going to tackle Strangers in Our City because that seems to be the biggest ebook. So I will give you another updated clip for this vlog as soon as I've read another book, so I can actually talk about it in a little bit more detail. But yeah, so far so good, because I predicted that would be one of the lowest ranked books for me, but we shall see, because there's a whole load of other stories in here. Obviously this is about Rough Sleepers, this is about homelessness. The Wager is about a story of a ship, tale of shipwreck, mutiny. The Great Displacement's about climate change. The Stranger in Our City is about Middle East's long war, which I know nothing about. The Master Slave Husband Wife will be an epic story from slavery to freedom. So the slavery story I think I'll really enjoy. I think I will enjoy Rough Sleepers. I don't know much about Middle East's long war, and the other two probably be a bit lower down, but I'll let you know when I've finished another book so we can actually catch up on some more reads. So I'll see you then. Okay, so it's taken a very long time to film this clip. This is way past when the Octafinals result has come through on the Booktube prize channel and the deadline. It's been so difficult to get even 5 minutes to be able to film. Because, as I mentioned in my earlier clip, I've moved back into a family home. There's 5 of us living in this house. There are young children, my nieces that come and visit often, which my dad helps out with, and my stepmom. We have family members come all the time. We've got dogs and people constantly coming to and fro in this house. There's never 5 minutes where you're on your own. So I'm just going to quickly try and wrap up as condensely as possible the 5 books I have not talked about in the previous clip and their rankings. So after I finished the art book, so the Story of Art is the one that I spoke to you about. So the next one I read was A Stranger in Your Own City. And this one was about the occupation of Iraq. It was about all the times that it has been occupied. It's been about pre-9/11 and Saddam Hussein's influence and dictatorship. Then it's about American occupancy of Iraq and its relationship with Iran. and it's a relationship with America, and then there was a dictatorship after the Americans left Iraq, and it briefly talks about Al-Qaeda and things like ISIS and the relationship with Iraq and its neighbouring countries and Syria. And it's from the perspective of somebody who lives in Iraq, an Iraqi citizen, and this kind of identity crisis and the impact it has on Iraq as a country and as a culture, a society and a nation. I found that it is a very complex history, and I kind of compared it mentally to kind of discussing the history of Ireland. It's very complicated, and the different Muslims, Sunni and Shia Muslims, and their different beliefs and the tension between them, and how different Muslim identities live next door to each other. A Sunni and a Shia might live near each other, and then the impact of the dictatorships and how there was this sense of trying to make them against each other, and the complexity of that. My own ignorance means I don't know a lot about this topic, so I felt a little bit disconnected from this story because I found that I didn't know enough. And so some bits of it were quite dense with information that I just wasn't really aware of. So I ended up giving the book 2.5 out of 5 stars, and it's not the fault of the author. I just think for most of this book it was a real struggle for me to get through because I just didn't know enough. And it was such a complex history, but it has encouraged me to go and read more about the history of Iraq and Iran and neighbouring places and the kind of impact, because it did have a lot of social commentary and a lot of things to dissect about where we are with our relationship with kind of the Al-Qaeda, the ISIS, the terrorism, and citizens that live in those countries. And there's a lot to unpick that I would like to kind of educate myself on more, so that I could have more of an opinion on that book and on the history. So I'll just leave that there because I really didn't have that much to say on that. So the next book I read was The Wager, which was a tale of shipwreck, mutiny and murder. This was really interesting because I don't tend to like books about kind of ships and voyages and the whole colonialism. We take places, we got on a ship, we stole things from other countries, we stole human beings and made them slaves from other countries, we brought them over in our ship and ruled Britannia, and it doesn't really interest me. However, this was a really unique take on the shipwreck story. I found it really quite juicy about the drama and the things that happened when they were away, and then how disjointed groups of the original voyage on the Wager come back in spits and spades, and then all have a different version of the history, and they all want to kind of throw each other under the bus. And that was really interesting for me. It's something I'd never heard about. And it kind of did... It feels like something that a Netflix or Prime would kind of do a series on, or a film on. It had lots of high drama, you know, they were shipwrecked for a while, and there was a lot of, you know, people turning on one another, and it was just very intriguing to me, and I found it was really enjoyable. So I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and was pleasantly surprised how interested and invested I was in this kind of like melodrama, especially considering it happened so long ago. But the characters were all kind of deplorable in equal ways, and it was really interesting, that idea of who writes the narrative and the truth that they felt so passionate about telling, but how each truth didn't really give the full picture. So it was really propulsive to read, but then it also was very reflective on this idea of who gets to tell whose story and whose truth is more accurate, and things like that we are all kind of interested in when we look at histories in the non-fiction genre. But it was something I knew nothing about, and it was a really refreshing take, and some of the characters and some of their actions will definitely stay with me long after. I finished the book, I can still kind of feel that they were really fleshed out humans to me. I was able to differentiate between all of them quite clearly, so that was good. And then the next book I read was The Great Displacement. I was very surprised that I enjoyed that quite as much as I did, because I don't really like the eco books on the non-fiction rounds usually. However, this had a really interesting take for me, because I don't live in a country like America or Canada, Australia, that's very vast. We are a tiny little island in Britain. The concept to me of people buying houses in areas that are susceptible to certain climate disasters, and insurers raking high insurance rates out of them, and then almost when these disasters happen saying that their insurance is void and they are homeless overnight, is a terrifying concept to me. And it's something I never really considered. So the devious way that the estate agents sell property, the devious way that the government legislation and law means that people can be quite sneaky about the history of an area in terms of its eco issues, and its history can be kind of wiped, and that government don't really get involved and support homeowners, is baffling, but was really informative for me. I didn't really understand that situation. So this book looks at different areas of climate change, like wildfires, floods, droughts, and the impact it has on a community that live there. And it was talking about how these climate issues are forcing people to migrate into other states and other areas, and potentially further afield out of the country or on the periphery of the country, because it's unsustainable to live there. People are having their houses completely demolished. You know, there's been really big events in America, like Hurricane Katrina, that have really kind of amplified this idea that these natural disasters really do destroy a community overnight. I just found the topic really fascinating, and I really didn't expect to. I ended up giving this book 4.5 out of 5 stars, which really shocked me, because I thought this was going to be my least favourite book of the series of books that I had to read, the kind of collection of books I had to read. But it gave me a lot of food for thought, and it really was showing some of the statistics that the author went into about how frequently these things are happening in the areas, and the pull it's having, and this issue of people talking about global warming isn't a thing, and this is showing exactly how it's impacting on a country like America. It was really, really interesting. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that one. And then the next one I read was Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. This was a story I hadn't heard about, but it was kind of a history that I feel confident in. So this was talking about how a kind of mixed race, lighter skinned woman who was a slave fell in love with another slave who was darker skinned, a male, and they kind of fled their enslavement to get married and to live their own life in a free state. So they lived in the south of America, and they wanted to flee to the north where they would be free from slavery. And it talks about how the only way they did this was that the woman in the couple, she was Ellen and he was William. So Ellen pretends to be a sick white slave owner who's taking her dark-skinned slave William travelling, and she gets a pass from her own enslavers to go and see her family in the north, and she uses that as her kind of currency to get them out. So she pretends to be a sick wealthy white man, and because she can pass for white because she's very light-skinned, she takes William as her slave. And the first half of the book goes through how they've actually escaped, how they got on trains and ships, and kind of how they got past all those kind of hoops to get in the north and to become free. And then it kind of shows how a lot of laws and legislations were trying to drag escaped slaves from the north back into the south, and how that kind of worked when her enslavers knew that she was free and William was free, and whether they were going to try and bring them back. and then how that helps them make the decision to migrate to Canada and then on to England for a while and then come back to America, but how the volatile nature of the insecurity of their freedom kind of kept them on the move. And it also mentions how when they're free in the north, the second half of the book kind of talks about how they end up meeting other free slaves. Frederick Douglass is a really good example of one of the more kind of famous figures that they come across, and they end up going on kind of across America. They go on lectures and tours telling their story alongside the other free slaves, to try and get the North to kind of empathise with them and to kind of hear the human story and to try and make America fully get rid of its slavery. And it was a really interesting book. Ellen was a really fiery character. She was really passionate, she was really dedicated, and I really resonated with her character. And I think William was kind of portrayed as a little bit more someone who leaned into what Ellen did. And there were some other characters that had a real impact on their lives, and they were able to kind of get an education through people that they knew. And it was a really interesting, unique love story, and the depths that they went to be free and to continue their relationship was really interesting and poignant. And I was very surprised that this isn't a story that is kind of not as well articulated in these kind of slave narratives as much as other people and their stories. So it was really nice that this author has allowed this story to come to the forefront and people to get more access to the story, the unique element of it, and the nice element of the love story that's kind of a unique selling point with the story. And although they had a lot of trials and tribulations post it, it kind of shows the tenacity of the human spirit and the desire to have love in your life, and how that was their motivation to get out of their enslavement. So yeah, I gave this 4 stars. I really, really, really loved it. And then the last book I read was Rough Sleepers by Tracy Kidder. So this is about Dr. Jim O'Connell and the work that he did with the homeless population in, I think it's Boston? Yes, Boston. So it talks about how he finished his medical residency, and then he gets asked to do a placement with kind of this rough sleeping project where these nurses have kind of got a unit that they're working on, and he thinks he's just going to do it for extra cred, just do a year of that, and then he'll pick his residency in something else. And then there's a woman, so Barbara, and she kind of really connects with him, and they kind of decide that he's going to stay on. So he creates this kind of initiative in Boston where he has a truck, a van that he goes out in, and he goes and sees homeless people out on the streets and provides medical aid for them. He also has a few different units that he set up that they can kind of get kind of shelters where they can sleep and receive treatment. He builds quite unique relationships with some of the homeless, and kind of looks at the reasons why they don't want to be in shelters, why some of them will choose to live rough. Issues like alcohol and drugs that keep people on the street, circumstances that have got them there. And Barbara kind of helps him in his career learn how to deal with this population, because they have some unique issues and unique behaviours that are not the same as the general public, but there's kind of a reason for that. So this story fundamentally brings a lot of humanity to the homeless population, and it also really explains why some of these stereotypes that we have about people that are homeless are so wrong, and that it's a very thankless task to kind of look after the homeless in some ways, because you don't get the same end result, the kind of nice shiny end result that you will have in kind of hospitals, but because of some of the stigma around being homeless and some of their concerns, they're a more intense group of people to look after, but they're kind of, some of them have really rewarding end stories and some don't. but Jim kind of provides this place where they can feel safe and a relationship where they can tell him everything, and he doesn't judge their kind of sporadic nomad kind of lifestyle. And he kind of lives for the relationships he has with them, the things that are going on, and we kind of see the impact of some of the homeless people that he really cared for when they die or when they get ill. This really changed how I viewed people that are homeless. I'd always known that it's not necessarily, through circumstance people can be homeless, and it's not because they're drug addicts, because of this, because of that. There's so many different factors that go into why somebody's homeless. But this really allowed me to understand that Jim is quite honest with Kidder when he kind of follows him on his shifts, about how sometimes it feels like a thankless task, but that the way he has helped deal with them has really improved the quality of their lives. And while it's not as statistically dissectable as other medical plans, because it does mention in the book how after a certain amount of years they tried to review it, and the results were kind of not really very measurable in terms of success. He thinks that this should be piloted across the US, the kind of services that he'd offered, and having a more specialist approach to the homeless would kind of benefit them. Everybody has a right to shelter, and everybody has a right to counsel and things like that. They have psychiatrists, they had drug addiction specialists, they had nurses, they had doctors, they had a full team to support them. And some of these characters were larger than life, and I thought that was really nice that we really got their stories across in this book. So I gave this 4 stars. I think for me overall, I had this sense quite early on that The Great Displacement was going to be my top choice, because it really surprised me. It was one I just didn't really have much space to be impressed with, and it really bowled me over. But one thing I will say about this particular Octafinals round, in all the time that I've done the Booktube prize, I have never been so impressed so early on with non-fiction titles. I think this was my best year so far with non-fiction titles. Usually the Octafinals, if I get non-fiction in the Octafinals, some can be real misses and some can be real hits. But I think the 4 books that I put at 4 stars, they were such good calibre and good quality that it was difficult to kind of rank them. I think A Stranger in Your Own City was quite easy to put at the bottom. It was not a bad book by any standards, and it probably should be a 3.5 if I would have connected with it better. But for personal preference, I just didn't really get a connection element, and because all the other books really blew me away, that's obviously gone in the 6th place. But the other, the kind of 4 were the hardest to pick. So in the end, I went in 5th place with The Story of Art Without Men. I mentioned that in the other clip. That really made me interested in the art world while I was reading it, which was a massive surprise to me because I, again, don't really care for art. But I think when I compare it to the other 3, it doesn't sit as memorably. When I gave my final rankings in, it didn't sit as memorably. So yeah, that went in 5th place. Then in 4th place, I put Rough Sleepers. Really enjoyed this book. I don't have anything negative to say about it. I think I just decided that the other 2 had kind of... It's just a gut feeling. It's really hard to describe, but when you judge and you have to pit 4 4-star books against each other, you just have to kind of find a way to justify it. And I think the other 2 I slightly enjoyed more. I think that's the only way you can describe it. But yeah, so this went in 4th. Then in 3rd, I put Master, Slave, Husband, Wife. I think it was a really unique story. I got really invested in Ellen and William's journey. I think considering it had 2 kind of clear sections in the book, the way it was written, it was still really propulsive to read. That was quite a hefty book, but it didn't feel very hefty to read. and the second half really gave a bit of relief to the first, because I think if it had just been the journey of escaping out of slavery, it would have got a bit boring. But I think the second bit about going on the tours and meeting other people and them having to move and the people they met and the way that they developed post freedom really added an extra layer to me. So that went in third. Then in second I put The Wager, because it just had that great impressibility factor for me. I really went in expecting it to be boring, really long-winded, just not my cup of tea. But in the end, I remember staying up later at night to finish it. The chapters were quite quick. It really felt like I was reading a novel, not a non-fiction. It was just really riveting for me. I loved the drama. I loved them being shipwrecked. I really liked that we got into kind of when they all came back into Britain and how the kind of dissecting of the story, that was a nice little chunk at the end that really added a nuance to the story. And it didn't just feel like they were stuck on a desert island for, 27 chapters, because that would have bored me to tears. It didn't feel like kind of a shipwreck story, because I don't like survival shipwreck. I don't, fighting to get fish and just laying on a beach and trying not to die of dehydration. That's not my kind of thing. But that's not this book. It's just so well done, and so many layers to it. So yeah, I was just so impressed, because I really wanted to not like it, and I had the complete opposite experience. So to me, that's impressive. And then obviously, like I've mentioned, the first place went to the Great Displacement, because again, I was determined that was just, no, I already said from the off that'll be my least favourite, so I think I kind of saved it towards the end of the pile of books to read, and then just couldn't stop thinking about it and thinking about these poor people being homeless overnight, and the way that estate agents were kind of tricking people into buying these houses and not having access to the history of the houses and the flood damage issues, or whether how far they were near to wildfires, or how frequently wildfires happen in the area. All these crazy things. It just really stuck with me. So yeah, I gave it just the slight edge, because it's a topic that I don't usually feel as connected to as I kind of feel connected to the historical non-fictions. I feel connected to the memoirs. I feel connection to the true crime type of non-fiction. For this to just have me like thinking about it for days afterwards, that's where it got its 0.5 extra star. So that is everything for this video. That's all my thoughts. I think in the end, the ones that went through were Rough Sleepers made it through, which I was very happy about, because although I only marked it 4th, I really enjoyed this story, and I think it's an important conversation, and it was written very well, so I'm glad that went through. I think Master, Slave, Husband, Wife went through, which again was a really good story. I was really happy. That was 3rd for me. Really enjoyed that one. And I can understand why other people in the prize really enjoyed that. And then I also think The Wager went through, which I was very happy about, because I was standing for that book after reading it, which I really didn't expect. So when it went through, I was kind of happy that books that I really, really enjoyed went through. And I'm not too upset that The Great Displacement didn't go through, because this was just my personal preference, but I'm very overall happy that me and the judges were on the whole on the same page. And like I said, everything that wasn't 1st and 6th was very difficult to rank, because I enjoyed them all so much. So anyway, that's that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with the next vlog, because I am in the Booktube prize quarterfinals, and I'm also doing non-fiction as well. So I will show you the books that I've got. Luckily this time round I've got a lot more physical. So in this round I had basically only one physical book, and the rest were Kindle books. Now I've got 2 Kindle books. One book I had to buy, a bit similar to this one. I just couldn't find this anywhere, so I had to order this one. I've got one that I had to order, and then I got 3 from the library. So that's the only good thing. The more you do non-fiction in the Booktube prize, the easier it gets to collect the books, but usually Octafinals is always a nightmare to get hold of some of the titles because they've not kind of been released here in the UK yet. But that's waffle over. I will tell you about the next books in the next video. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be back very soon. Bye now.